Order. The honourable member.
Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to discuss my concurrence motion on the report of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development on Canada's approach to sexual and reproductive health and rights. This was an important report that made 14 recommendations to the Government of Canada's work to promote and to fund sexual and reproductive health and rights globally. And I want to thank all of the witnesses that came before our committee to provide us with their expertise and their important information. And this report comes at a crucial time when we are witnessing globally terrifying backsliding on women's rights. We're living through a coordinated global backlash against sexual and reproductive rights for women, and we are seeing a global rise in authoritarianism. We are also seeing real barriers to access to reproductive and sexual health care here in Canada, and this is unacceptable. Because, Madam Speaker, women's health care is a right, and women's lives matter. This report came about after a very challenging period of time during the Foreign Affairs Committee. The Conservatives decided to impose their ideological extremism on the other members of the committee and initiated a filibuster that lasted 9 meetings. Madam Speaker, that was 18 hours of committee time. The member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, essentially held this committee hostage for an entire season, meaning that the committee could not do the other urgent work on Ukraine, Ethiopia, Haiti, and others.
Order. There seems to be a lot of noise, and so I would ask members if they want to have conversations, they should step outside to have those conversations. Is the honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley rising on a point of order?
Just ask, as the Conservative MPs flee the chamber during this discussion about reproductive rights, that they could be as quiet as possible so that we can hear our honourable colleague make her speech.
Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I was talking about when this study was in front of committee and that the member for Fort Saskatchewan Sherwood Park was obstructing the work of the committee for, in fact, 18 hours so that we could not be doing any of the work that we needed to do as the Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, I have to tell you as well that as a woman being told for 18 hours what I can do with my body by a white male was extraordinarily difficult, and I'm sure it was very, very difficult for many women who were watching the proceedings in that chamber. I want to talk a little bit about the House and what our committee heard from the testimony. So Julia Anderson of CanWatch said Canada needed to develop, and I quote, a cohesive strategy around sexual health and reproductive rights in Canada's foreign policy, and that investment alone is not enough. Lauren Ravon of Oxfam Canada said that being effective was a matter of combining money and voice. Kelly Bowden of Action Canada argued that Canada has, quote, a huge platform to stand on because of investments made, but that we risk backsliding on women's rights if we don't leverage the opportunity to make more progress, especially through a more fulsome feminist foreign policy. You know, Beth Warniak, a good friend of mine, noted that we still have not seen the government's feminist foreign policy, the long-promised feminist foreign policy that nobody has seen. In the absence of that document, diplomats and aid workers are often not aware of what their responsibilities are, and Canada has not been clear globally with our partners. Dr. Karam of the UN Population Fund told us that Canada needs to show global leadership on the issue now, because the pushback on gender equality and women and girls' rights is intensifying.
There's still individuals who are having conversations, and I'm sure that those individuals are more interested in the conversation than what the speech is in the House. So I would ask them to please take their conversations aside. Many are very seasoned in the House, and I would ask them to please respect the rules of the House. The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to talk a little bit about the global context in which we are finding ourselves. What we are seeing globally is terrifying. Ongoing violence against women and restrictions on women's access to reproductive and sexual health care, rising support for extreme right politicians and political parties in several countries, a weakening of our democratic institutions, a growth in far-right misogynistic attitudes and movements that is provoking growing levels of sexual and gender-based violence around the world. Anti-trans violence is on the rise globally, with trans women of color being the most at risk. Attacks, intimidation, threats, and harassment against women politicians are growing, and these are all evidence of backlash against women's rights and feminist movements. And it is necessary that all of us are fighting for women and gender diverse people, and that those of us that are in positions of power are using our voice for that right. We are seeing increased attacks on gender equality and sexual and reproductive rights at the United Nations, in national, political, and legislative processes, online, in schools, and in our communities. We know that these attacks share common tactics, strategies, and funders across borders, and they are linked to broader, white supremacist, anti-democratic, anti-human rights, and oppressive regimes and political actions. In 2021, a report by the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights documented funding from Russian oligarchs to anti-abortion organizations across Europe. These are the same oligarchs who have been sanctioned for their role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which President Putin has framed as defense of, quote, traditional values. Globally, the same people who deny women their rights are the same people who praise authoritarian tactics and policies. And in Canada, we don't get to escape this. What's happening in the United States and in other countries is proof that we can't assume that our rights will remain protected here in Canada. Today, access to reproductive health services is severely restricted for some people in Canada, including those in Indigenous, rural, remote, and northern communities, and in provinces where the federal government has not done enough to ensure that access is available. We've also seen strong opposition to examining abortion and reproductive rights in the House of Commons, led by members of the Conservative Party, many of whom get support from anti-abortion groups. In Canada, there are over 300 documented anti-abortion organizations trying to dissuade people from accessing the health care that they are entitled to by using a variety of tactics, including disseminating misinformation and disinformation. Many are affiliated with U.S.-based organizations. They mimic their talking points around, quote, traditional values. They reject the advancements of a range of human rights related to sexuality and gender, and they are emboldened by the support of the Conservative Party of Canada. The anti-choice movement is calling the shots for the Conservatives. That, Madam Speaker, is very clear. Restricting access to reproductive health options for women does not stop abortions from happening. It simply stops safe abortions from happening. Racialized people, those from lower socioeconomic households, young people, and other marginalized people are always the people that bear the burden of these retro policies. Wealthy, predominantly white women will always have access to reproductive services they require because they have the means to access them. New Democrats will continue to resist attacks on women, trans, and all people's human rights by the Conservatives. Madam Speaker, abortion is health care. It's wrong for governments to set barriers between women and the care that they choose for their own bodies and the future that they choose for themselves and for their families. Public universal health care, including abortion, is part of Canada, and it is part of our Canadian values. Today, too many pregnant Canadians have the heart-wrenching experience of calling to find that abortion care is not available, that roadblocks have been put up in their place, that long waits or even a price tag are attached. But make no mistake, this doesn't have to be the way that we do this. You know, we have seen the Liberals let women and gender diverse people down. Their actions have not matched their words. The Liberals are too weak to stand up to those premiers, those Conservative premiers who are restricting women's access to health care. I think about New Brunswick, where the last abortion clinic closed last year. I think about my own province of Alberta, where Daniel Smith is handing hospitals over to a private faith-based group that will put health care like MAID and reproductive health care at risk. This committee study in this report was so important to remind us that sexual and reproductive health is at the heart of the most important decisions a woman makes: if and when to marry, how long to stay in school, and how many children to have. And we know the millions of women and girls around the world do not get to freely make these decisions. Poor health services and information limit their freedoms and put their lives at risk. When women are not allowed to make decisions, we all suffer. Every woman must be able to do that. Madam Speaker, I am a mother, I am a woman, I have a daughter, and I would not want at any point for her rights to be infringed upon. And what I want for my daughter as a New Democrat, I want for all daughters. I want for all women. Thank you.
Hear, hear.